The first thing I saw after falling out of my own world was a bird the size of a donkey eating something worth more than my entire house. I did not know the second part yet. At the time, all I knew was that my face was pressed into warm red soil. Rain was dripping from the end of my nose, and a blue-feathered creature with 4 golden eyes was calmly pulling glowing roots out of the ground beside me. I pushed myself onto my elbows. The bird looked at me. I looked at the bird. It swallowed an entire silver-leafed plant. Then 3 people in long brown robes came running down the terrace shouting. That was when I decided I had either died, hit my head very badly, or somehow wandered into the most aggressive botanical garden in existence. Less than an hour earlier, I had been in Lesotho. My name was Naledi Mokoena. I was 24 years old, and I had been checking a blocked drainage trench before a mountain storm reached our fields. That was not as dramatic as it sounds. If you grow anything on sloping ground, blocked drainage stops being boring the moment, several tons of water, decide they would prefer your topsoil at the bottom of the hill. I remembered lightning. Not nearby lightning. The kind that turns the whole world white. I remembered grabbing a fence post. Then I remembered falling. After that, red soil. Giant bird. Angry strangers. One of the men reached me first. He stared at the uprooted plants, went pale, and said something I somehow understood even though I had never heard the language before. 9 moon lilies. I glanced at the bird. It ate another one. 8, I said. That did not improve the situation. They dragged me uphill to a stone house built into the terrace wall. I say dragged, but mostly they walked very quickly, while one of them kept a hand near the sword at his waist, and I made the sensible decision not to test whether my suddenly multilingual brain had also learned how to survive being stabbed. The man waiting inside was named Veron Tall. He was perhaps 50, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, and dressed like someone who expected soil to apologize before touching his boots. He managed Red Clay Estate, one of the largest spirit farms in what I soon learned was called the 7 Valleys. He listened, while his workers explained that I had appeared in the eastern medicinal terrace during a lightning disturbance. Then he looked at me. Clan. None. Sect. I don't know what that is. Registration seal. No. Cultivation. I hesitated. Gardening. That was the first time I saw Veron smile. It was not a friendly smile. By sunset, I understood enough to realize how bad my situation was. The 7 Valleys were not merely agricultural land. They were a cultivation region where almost every important profession depended on spiritual energy. Alchemists turned medicinal herbs into pills. Formation masters carved arrays that gathered and redirected chi. Talisman makers inscribed techniques onto spiritual paper. Beast tamers raised magical creatures whose cores could become stronger than some humans. Cultivators trained their bodies and souls until they could do things that would have ended several branches of physics back home. And spirit farmers. Spirit farmers grew everyone else's ingredients. Useful. Necessary. Respectable, if you were being polite. Powerful. Apparently not. Veron informed me that the moon lilies destroyed during my arrival were worth 360 spirit coins. I had 0. He could have reported me as an unregistered outsider, which apparently would have meant confinement until someone decided what to do with me. Instead, he offered me a contract. At first, I thought that was generous. Then he showed me the land. The terrace lay on the far northern edge of the estate. Its soil was almost gray. Half the irrigation stones had cracked. Salt had crusted around one channel. Sparse yellow grass clung to the edges, and even I could tell something was wrong with the place before I knew anything about magical farming. Veron spread his hands. 1 year, produce 200 baskets of first-grade spirit grain. Your debt is erased. And if I don't, 7 years of bonded agricultural service. I looked down at the terrace again. What grew here last year? Red pearl millet. The year before. Red pearl millet. And before that. He frowned. Red pearl millet. How long? 19 years. I stared at him. He stared back. I knelt, dug my fingers into the dirt, and rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger. Fine structure. Poor organic matter. Compaction beneath the surface. I smelled it. Almost nothing. Then something strange happened. Warmth moved through my fingertips. Not heat exactly. More like the sensation of standing near an electrical appliance and knowing it was switched on. I pressed my palm flat against the earth. The feeling spread. There were faint currents below me. Some weak. Some jagged. One along the irrigation line felt almost painful. I pulled my hand back. Varen mistook my expression for despair. If the land frightens you, you may refuse. I looked at 19 years of failed monoculture. Then I looked at a man who had just offered a farmer a ruined field because he thought dirt was dirt. Why, I asked, have you been planting the same crop here for 19 years? His smile disappeared. That was how my new life began. Not with a sword. Not with a divine inheritance. Not with a mysterious old master. With exhausted soil and an argument about crop rotation. Honestly, that should have warned everyone. The contract gave me 3 things. A broken shed. A set of hand tools. And the legal right to use whatever grew naturally on my assigned terrace. Varen did not consider that last part valuable. I did. My first week in the 7 Valleys was mostly spent learning how much I did not know. For example, I learned that red pearl millet could store spiritual energy inside its grain. I learned that cultivating even the lowest level of spiritual power allowed farmers to sense moisture and encourage seed germination. I learned that the local cultivation system began with something called the spirit seed realm. Most laborers on Red Clay Estate never advanced beyond it. Skilled cultivators reached rooted, then branching. The strongest people I met were canopy cultivators. Above them were the so-called valley lords, figures important enough that entire towns changed plans when one traveled through. Varen was late branching. That meant he could split a stone irrigation slab with one strike. I discovered this because he did it while explaining why I should not attempt to leave before my debt was repaid. I made a mental note. Do not annoy Varen near rocks. My own cultivation was non-existent, but the strange sensation in my hands kept returning. Plants felt different from soil. When I touched a healthy weed, I sensed slow warmth moving from its roots upward. A sick plant felt interrupted. The root zone beneath one struggling grass patch felt sharp and unpleasant. I dug there and found pale worms chewing the roots. That was when I realized I was sensing more than ordinary biology. Whatever had happened during my crossing had changed something. I tested it carefully. Healthy soil. Warm. Compacted soil. Dull. Waterlogged soil. Heavy, cold pressure. A flowering weed covered in tiny blue insects. Flickering irritation. I could not identify magical species by touching them. I did not receive names in my head. There was no helpful voice telling me what to do. I simply felt whether a living system was functioning. Fortunately, that happened to be something I understood. The first person who took me seriously was Myra Vey. She arrived carrying a stack of failed talismans and enough annoyance for 3 people. Myra was 19 and apprenticed to a talisman workshop in the nearby town. She had come to Red Clay Estate looking for cheap reed fiber because her master had told her she wasted too much expensive paper. She found me pulling weeds. You are the foreign debtor. I prefer Naledi. Everyone says you asked Master Varen why he planted the same crop for 19 years. He did. Myra looked around. That was rude. It was also a very good question. She considered that. Then she crouched beside me. What are you planting? Nothing valuable. That made her laugh. I had spent most of my first month deliberately avoiding expensive crops. Instead, I planted hardy ground-covering clover, a local legume that produced small bitter pods, deep-rooted bluegrass, and flowering herbs everyone else considered weeds. Red clay workers mocked me constantly. One man asked whether I intended to repay 360 spirit coins using animal feed. I told him that depended on whether his accounting system accepted goats. The problem was that spirit agriculture in the Seven Valleys had become addicted to shortcuts. Farmers used concentrated spirit fertilizer produced from powdered monster cores. They planted high-value crops repeatedly. When yields fell, they applied more fertilizer. When disease increased, they used stronger pest formations. When soil structure collapsed, they blamed declining spiritual veins. It was not completely foolish. Their methods produced enormous short-term yields. Varen had become wealthy using them. But the ruined terrace showed the cost. I started rebuilding the basics. Ground cover to reduce erosion. Legumes to restore fertility. Deep roots to break compacted soil. Compost from every scrap I could gather. Alternating plant families. I repaired the irrigation channels so water spread slowly rather than tearing through one corner. I planted aromatic flowers near areas where magical insects appeared. The strange perception in my hands sharpened every week. Then Pulla arrived. I woke one morning to find a fat gray animal sitting directly on my seed tray. It resembled a rock hyrax from home, except it had round ears, silver whiskers, and an impressive absence of shame. Move. It stared at me. I tried pushing it. It became heavier. I am not exaggerating. The creature somehow anchored itself to the ground. Myra later informed me that it was a stoneback hyrax, a minor spirit beast known for manipulating earth chi. I named it Pulla because rain had brought me to this world, and because I needed something familiar. Pulla responded by eating 6 of my experimental seedlings. After that, he became part of the farm. Not because I wanted him. Because no method available to me could convince him otherwise. 3 months after I began, my first major breakthrough happened while I was kneeling between rows of clover and bluegrass. I had planted the 2 species together because their roots occupied different soil depths. Beside them grew an aromatic flower that discouraged a sap-sucking insect. I touched the soil. Warmth rushed up my arm. Not the faint warmth I had grown used to. This was a current. Energy moved through the roots, crossed through the damp soil, flowed into the clover, into the grass, into the flowers, and back toward me. My breathing stopped. The plants were not merely growing beside one another. They were exchanging spiritual energy. I sat in the center of the rows and closed my eyes. For the first time, I could sense the entire little patch at once. Water, roots, fungi, plants, insects, soil. A loop. Something inside my chest answered. There was a sudden tightness beneath my ribs, then a sensation like a seed cracking open. The energy from the field rushed into me. I fell backward. Pulla, who had been sleeping on a warm stone, opened one eye. Helpful, I muttered. My hands were glowing faintly green. Later, Myra nearly dropped her basket when she saw me. You formed a spirit seed. I think the clover did it. She stared. People meditate for months to do that. I have been working here for 3. That is not the point. It was exactly the point. I had not cultivated by sitting in a room. I had cultivated by improving the field. And once I understood that, I stopped asking whether farming could make me stronger. I started wondering how large a field I could build. My first harvest did not impress Varen. That was because he was measuring the wrong thing. I produced only 42 baskets of spirit grain. The contract required 200. When he came to inspect the terrace, he looked at the numbers, looked at me, and said, "You have 9 months remaining." Then he walked away. He did not test the soil. The estate steward did. His name was Dorek, and unlike Varen, he had spent 30 years actually working fields. He took one handful, squeezed it, and went quiet. "What did you add?" "Mostly compost." "No." He held out the soil. Dark, crumbly, full of fine roots. This land was dead. It was tired. He looked at me in a way I had not seen before. Not admiration. Concern. Sometimes concern is more useful. Because it means someone intelligent has realized the rules may be changing. By the 5th month, I had reached the rooted realm. That should have taken years. I still could not perform most basic techniques. I learned this when Myra tried teaching me a simple light spell. I produced a green spark, burned my sleeve, startled Pulla, and spent the next 20 minutes chasing him out of an irrigation channel. Myra laughed so hard she had to sit down. This became a recurring irritation in my life. I could sense spiritual relationships across an entire terrace. I could encourage root growth with my hands. I could enter cultivation states while transplanting seedlings. But ordinary magic. Disaster. Fortunately, my fields were becoming very good at magic for me. The discovery came from planting geometry. I had always arranged crops according to practical needs. Tall plants where they would not shade shorter ones. Moisture-loving crops near channels. Hardy shrubs along exposed edges. Flowers near pollination routes. Then Myra showed me a basic formation manual. I nearly insulted several generations of formation masters. These are irrigation maps. They are not irrigation maps. This one gathers energy toward a center. Yes, which is what a drainage basin does. It is a formation. This one separates incompatible energies by placing buffering nodes between them. Yes, companion planting. Naledi. This one uses 8 anchor points to stabilize a boundary. Naledi. Windbreak. She closed the book. I dislike talking to you. I borrowed it anyway. Formation theory became the most exciting thing I had discovered since arriving. Not because formations were new. Because they described the same kind of relationships I already understood using different language. Nodes. Flows. Anchors. Reservoirs. Balance. Redirection. Feedback. I began experimenting. The first deliberate living formation used 12 plant groups. 4 deep-rooted shrubs anchored earth chi around the perimeter. Moisture plants regulated water energy. Sun-loving fireleaf absorbed excess heat. Silver clover filled the gaps. A ring of aromatic flowers controlled insect pressure. Beneath it all, fungi connected the root zones. At sunset, I sat in the center. The entire terrace breathed. That is the only way I can describe it. Chi entered from the eastern slope, circulated through the plant groups, slowed near the water channel, strengthened beneath the shrubs, and returned through the soil. Then it passed through me. My rooted cultivation surged. I remained sitting until midnight. When I opened my eyes, every plant around me was covered in faint green light. Myra stood outside the field. Taru Fen stood beside her. I had not met Taru before. He was a beast handler from a ranch several valleys south. He was tall, permanently sunburned, and had the expression of a man who had spent his life explaining simple instructions to creatures that did not care. He pointed at 3-hoofed animals, eating my boundary grass. Those are Emberhorn deer. Are they yours? They were. Was ownership temporary? They broke a reinforced pen, crossed 6 kilometers, and climbed a stone wall to eat your grass. I looked at the deer. One sneezed sparks. What do you normally feed them? Firegrain, redroot meal, mineral salt. Anything fresh. He frowned. Fresh. That conversation started another branch of my education. The 100 paths were supposedly distinct disciplines. But the longer I looked, the less distinct they became. Alchemy needed plants. Talismans needed paper. Paper needed fiber. Ink required pigments, oils, resins, and mineral binders. Beast taming depended on animals. Animals depended on feed. Feed depended on plants. Formation arrays used carved wood, spirit ink, resin, stone, metal, and sometimes living anchors. Medicine depended heavily on herbs. Even weaponsmiths used plant oils, charcoal, resin, and specialized wood. I told Myra that the 100 paths seemed to be 99 professions, pretending they had never met a farmer. She repeated that joke in town. It became annoyingly popular. By month 7, alchemists were visiting my terrace because herbs grown there had unusually stable chi. That surprised me too. I had not intentionally improved medicinal quality. But different growing conditions changed plants. Earth farmers already knew that stress, minerals, water, harvest timing, and genetics affected chemical compounds. Apparently, spirit plants behaved similarly. I began growing identical medicinal herbs under controlled variations. More water. Less water. Different companion plants. Morning harvest. Night harvest. Higher earth chi. Higher water chi. The results were dramatic. One herb grown beside a mineral-loving root contained 40% more earth energy. Another harvested just before sunrise retained twice as much cooling chi. An elderly alchemist named Sen Eru bought the entire test batch. Then he returned 3 days later and asked who had taught me elemental herb conditioning. I told him nobody. He did not believe me. That became common. People believed knowledge had to come from somewhere respectable. An ancient master. A lost manual. A secret clan. Very few accepted. I paid attention to vegetables as an explanation. Varen noticed the visitors. Then he noticed the money. By month 8, he offered to cancel my debt immediately. All I had to do was transfer ownership of every cultivation method, seed line, and plant arrangement I developed while living on red clay property. He placed the agreement on a table between us. A year earlier, perhaps I would have been frightened. Now I was rooted, almost branching. More importantly, 40 local farmers were already asking me for seed. No. His eyes narrowed. You misunderstand your position. No, I finally understand it. This estate gave you land. You gave me land that had failed for 19 years. I gave you an opportunity. And I repaired your soil. For the first time, his control slipped. You still owe this estate. I owe 360 spirit coins, or 200 baskets of grain. He went still. I placed a purse on the table. 360 coins. Exact. Myra had insisted on counting twice. I stood. Varen stared at the money. Then at me. He had expected me to fail. Instead, I had become profitable enough to buy my freedom 4 months early. That should have been the end of our conflict. Instead, it was the moment he decided I had become competition. Freedom presented a problem I had not expected. Land. I had learned to cultivate through ecosystems. Without fields, my progress slowed. Fortunately, Red Clay Estate was not the only place with abandoned terraces. The Northern Valley had dozens. Some had been abandoned because irrigation failed. others because spirit veins had weakened, several because soil disease made high-value crops impossible. To local investors, they were worthless. To me, they were affordable. Myra invested nearly all her savings. Taru contributed less money and several wagon loads of manure, which he claimed were worth more spiritually. I told him that depended on the manure. He took that personally. Together we leased 8 terraces. I called the place Mountain Root Farm. Myra said the name lacked grandeur. She suggested Verdant Heaven Pavilion. Taru suggested Deer Escape Valley. I kept Mountain Root Farm. Pulla did not vote. He had begun spending his afternoons stealing a pale silver reed I was testing for fiber. At first I chased him away. Then I noticed something. He ignored ordinary reeds. He ignored mature silver reeds. He only ate one crossbred line. I had begun selective breeding almost accidentally. The local silver reed made excellent talisman paper, but grew slowly and required high spiritual density. A common marsh reed grew quickly, but held almost no chi. I crossed them. Most offspring were terrible. Some produced weak fiber. Some failed to germinate. One line grew fast and retained nearly half the spiritual conductivity of pure silver reed. Pulla ate that line constantly. Myra turned its fibers into experimental paper. Her first talisman burned. The second tore. The third worked. The fourth worked better than the expensive commercial paper she had been buying. Myra sat in my shed, surrounded by strips of handmade paper, and started crying. I panicked. Is it bad? She laughed through the tears. No. Then why are you crying? My master told me I would never be a serious talisman maker because I waste premium materials. She picked up one sheet. This costs 1/6 as much. That was when I understood that my work did not merely affect my cultivation. It could change access. Expensive materials kept entire professions narrow. If better agriculture reduced those costs, the 100 paths opened to people who had never been able to afford them. That idea became important later. At the time, it mostly created problems. Within 6 months, Mountain Root Farm became successful enough that 3 Alchemy houses offered contracts. 2 talisman workshops wanted exclusive access to our reeds. Taru developed a line of fresh fodder for Imberhorn deer using my mixed grasses. The animals became healthier. Juveniles advanced faster. One female deer developed a second flame crest that Taru swore her bloodline should not possess. He became obsessed. You changed her bloodline. I fed her properly. You changed her bloodline with grass. I think your old feed was deficient. Do you understand how insulting that is? To you. To generations of beast tamers. Good. Spirit beasts began visiting the farm. At first they were small. Birds. Burrowing foxes. Stoneback hyraxes. Then larger animals appeared. A wind antelope started sleeping near our northern boundary. 2 moonwing cranes nested beside an irrigation pond. A young moss bear wandered into a medicinal terrace, ate 40 kilograms of vine melon, and refused to leave until Taru bribed it with more. I was horrified. Myra found the situation hilarious. My cultivation accelerated. Every stable relationship I created seemed to strengthen the strange bond inside me. When a field became healthier, I felt it. When a new crop combination began exchanging chi efficiently, my meridians widened. When I successfully bred a useful new trait, my spiritual perception deepened. By the end of my second year in the 7 valleys, I reached canopy. People stopped laughing. Then I entered the mist garden. The secret realm opened every 3 years in a canyon east of the valleys. Cultivators entered looking for old artifacts, rare herbs, beast cores, and cultivation manuals. I entered with 47 cloth seed bags. Myra asked whether I planned to rob the realm agriculturally. Yes. The mist garden changed everything. The realm was ancient, humid, and half-wild. Stone paths disappeared beneath vines. Ruined pavilions sat inside forests of luminous bamboo. Most expedition groups rushed toward known treasure zones. I watched weeds. That sounds ridiculous until you understand weeds. Plants tell you what happened somewhere. Disturbance. Water. Fire. Nutrients. Grazing. Disease. I noticed a low purple plant growing only near collapsed formations. I found a fern concentrated around hidden water channels. A thorn vine appeared wherever large beasts frequently traveled. By reading the vegetation, I could infer the landscape. It led me to places nobody mapped. In one valley, I found wild ancestors of red pearl millet. They were ugly. Small seed heads. Uneven ripening. Hard husks. Every farmer I knew would have rejected them. I nearly shouted with excitement. Domesticated plants lose things. Disease resistance. Environmental tolerance. Root vigor. Genetic diversity. Wild relatives preserve them. I collected seeds until Myra threatened to carry me out. Then Pulla vanished. We found him inside a ruined greenhouse, biting a grass I had never seen. The grass looked unimpressive. Thin blades. Gray-green. No visible spiritual glow. But when I touched it, my entire arm tingled. Its roots were connected to 3 completely different species, growing nearby. Not tangled. Connected. Chi moved through them. I spent 2 hours digging around the network. The grass acted like a bridge. Plants that normally competed for incompatible elemental energies were exchanging power through it. I collected every viable seed I could find. Back at Mountain Root Farm, it took me 9 months to stabilize the trait. Most crosses failed. Some plants connected too aggressively and drained their neighbors. Others collapsed under mixed energies. One hybrid survived. I called it bridgegrass. When I planted bridgegrass between 2 previously incompatible living formations, the separate energy loops joined. My entire farm lit green. I broke through canopy in a single night. The formation master who came to inspect us stood in silence for nearly a minute. Then he asked where the formation core was. I pointed at the field. He asked where the engraved channels were. I pointed at the irrigation ditches. He asked where the stabilizing plates were. I pointed at the trees. Then he asked something that mattered. Where does the formation end? I opened my mouth and realized I did not know. By my 3rd year, Varental had stopped pretending I was an inconvenience. He treated me as a threat. I almost respected him for that. Almost. Red Clay Estate still dominated agricultural trade across 3 valleys. Varen had contracts with fertilizer suppliers, seed merchants, transport houses, and 2 major alchemy guilds. His farms produced extraordinary yields when conditions were good. My methods produced smaller peak harvests, but they used less fertilizer, less water, fewer pesticides, and they became stronger over time instead of weaker. Farmers noticed. Varen responded intelligently. He sent agents to study our planting arrangements. He purchased our publicly sold seed. He recreated several mixed fields. They failed. He could copy the species. He could not copy the relationships. One terrace became waterlogged because he used my moisture plants without adjusting irrigation. Another developed mineral deficiency because he removed the legume rotation to increase medicinal acreage. A third attracted spirit beasts but lacked habitat buffers, resulting in a week where 6 Emberhorn deer destroyed a storage building. Teru laughed about that for months. Varen then offered partnership. Not employment. Partnership. 40% of Mountain Root Farm in exchange for access to red clay distribution, spirit fertilizer, and irrigation rights. The offer was good. That made refusing harder. Myra wanted to consider it. Taru did not. I wanted to say no immediately. Myra stopped me. You dislike him. Yes. That is not analysis. He tried to trap me in 7 years of bonded labor. True. He wants control. Also true. He thinks my methods are assets he can own. Probably true. She folded her arms. But if the partnership gives us enough land to distribute cheap talisman fiber to every workshop in the Northern Valley, does your dislike matter more? I hated when Myra was reasonable. We negotiated. Varen refused one condition: independent seed ownership. He wanted every new variety developed through his land or infrastructure to belong to the estate. That ended the discussion. 3 months later, he used his influence over the Northern Irrigation Council to cut our dry season water allocation by 30%. He also convinced the largest spirit fertilizer merchant to cancel our account. Myra arrived at my house, holding both notices. He did this. Yes. What do we do? I looked over our terraces. Deep-rooted shrubs, water-taining soil, mulched beds, storage ponds, legumes, compost, low-loss channels. We use 30% less water. She blinked. Already. About 37. And fertilizer. I stopped buying concentrated fertilizer 6 months ago. Myra stared at the notices, then started laughing. That was one of the most satisfying days of my life. Varen had tried to cut 2 dependencies I had already removed. Unfortunately, nature created a bigger problem. The first signs appeared as white spotting on red pearl millet. Within 12 days, 4 estates reported it. Within a month, the disease had spread across the eastern valleys. Farmers called it ghost blight. It attacked root channels first. Plants remained green for days, while spiritual circulation collapsed beneath the soil. Then entire fields grayed almost overnight. Red clay was hit badly. Monocultures gave the disease perfect continuity. Plants stood close together. They shared similar genetics. Fertilizer pushed fast, soft growth. Once ghost blight entered one section, it spread like fire through dry grass. Mountain Root Farm had cases too. But outbreaks stopped. Different crops interrupted transmission. Some companion plants suppressed the disease. Several of my wild-cross millet lines showed natural resistance. I began distributing seed. Not selling at emergency prices. Distributing. Varen sent a messenger, offering 8 times the normal price for all resistant stock. I sold red clay the same amount I sold any large farm. He demanded more. I refused. Not out of revenge. Because if one estate took everything, hundreds of small farmers would lose their harvests. That decision made me famous. I did not enjoy fame. People began arriving daily. Farmers, alchemists, officials, formation masters, researchers. One man traveled 4 days to ask whether I could increase the spiritual sweetness of a melon used in ceremonial wine. I told him I was dealing with an agricultural epidemic. He offered triple price. I considered throwing a melon at him. The ghost blight crisis lasted 1 season. By its end, Mountain Root Farm had expanded to 43 terraces. Our resistant millet was growing in 6 valleys. Red Clay Estate lost nearly half its harvest and most of its dominance over regional grain contracts. Varen survived financially. But smaller farmers no longer depended on his seed. That mattered more. Then came the moment everyone began calling me a Valley Lord. I rejected the title at first. A valley lord was supposed to be a cultivator at the peak of local power. I was strong, but I still did not think of myself that way. Then a ridge formation failed above our southern terraces during a storm. A wall of mud, broken stone, and floodwater came down the slope. 3 years earlier, it would have destroyed the farm. I stood in the field. I did not cast a spell. I reached through the living formation. Trees anchored. Deep roots tightened. Water plants opened their channels. Bridgegrass transferred earth chi across 6 terraces. The entire landscape responded. The flood split around us. Water slowed. Sediment dropped. Terrace walls held. When it ended, I was still standing in the same place. The regional formation master who witnessed it looked at me and said quietly, "No local array can do that." I looked around. It wasn't an array. That was when he shook his head. That is the problem. My fields had become too large to think of as separate formations, and my cultivation had become too large to fit inside my body. I could feel every connected terrace. 43. Then 50. Then 70. When I cultivated, energy did not merely gather in my meridians. It circulated through kilometers of roots. My body had become one node among thousands. The realization frightened me. It also revealed something else. The energy patterns beneath the 7 valleys were familiar. Too familiar. The rivers, terrace lines, ancient forests, mountain ridges. They were arranged like a formation. A formation so large everyone had mistaken it for geography. Once I noticed the pattern, I became impossible to live with. Myra said that, not me. I stopped sleeping properly. I carried maps everywhere. I measured river angles. I visited old terraces that had not been farmed in centuries. I compared ancient stone walls with living formation diagrams. Taru found me one morning, standing on a hill before sunrise, staring at 3 mountains. "Have they offended you?" "They're nodes. They are mountains." "Both." He sighed. "Of course they are." The 7 valleys formed a vast ancient structure. Not perfectly. Parts were missing. Some forests had been cut. Several wetlands drained. Certain traditional crops had disappeared. But the underlying geometry remained. What bothered me most was that bridgegrass fit the missing channels. Not approximately. Exactly. The root-linking function I had discovered in the mist garden matched gaps in the valley-wide pattern. That suggested the grass had once been part of the system. I searched old records. Most were useless. Farming histories listed yields and property disputes. Sect records praised powerful ancestors. Religious texts turned practical facts into metaphors. Then Myra found a fragment inside an old talisman archive. It described gardeners who stitched the sleeping valleys together with silver roots. Gardeners, not kings, not formation grandmasters. Gardeners. We spent 2 months restoring one suspected junction. At the center stood a barren slope everyone assumed contained a dead spirit vein. I planted bridgegrass, then deep-rooted shrubs, then silver reeds, then a ring of 4 medicinal trees associated with different elements. Nothing happened. For 3 weeks. Myra asked whether I had finally found a formation too large to bully with vegetables. Then Pulla dug up one bridgegrass root and dragged it 20 meters downhill. I shouted at him. He ignored me. He buried the root beside a cracked stone. The mountain hummed. Every bird in the valley stopped making noise. I stared at Pulla. He stared back. "Do that again." He sat down. Taru said, "He understands you." "I know. He is refusing." "I also know." We excavated the stone. Beneath it lay an ancient channel carved through bedrock. Bridgegrass roots entered a hairline crack. Green light spread downward. The formation woke. Not fully. Just enough. A pulse rolled beneath the valley. Trees shivered without wind. Rivers brightened. Every connected field on Mountain Root Farm answered at once. My cultivation surged so violently, I dropped to one knee. Then the mountain opened. A vertical seam appeared in the rock. Stone slid aside. Behind it stood a circular arch made from pale wood that should have rotted thousands of years ago. Pulla walked through. Of course he did. I followed because apparently being one of the strongest cultivators in the 7 valleys did not free me from retrieving an animal with no respect for cosmic boundaries. The world on the other side smelled like rain. Not our rain. Something richer. I stepped through the arch and found myself standing beneath trees taller than city towers. Their branches held glowing rivers. Plants climbed through the air without support. Flowers opened and released tiny lights that moved like insects. In the distance, what I first thought was a mountain shifted. It was a tree root. A single root. Myra stepped beside me. For once, she had nothing to say. Then someone dropped from a branch above us. A woman landed lightly on the ground. She appeared perhaps 30, though I later learned that estimate was embarrassingly meaningless. Her name was Iria Saul. She wore simple green clothing and carried a wooden staff. I sensed her cultivation, then immediately wished I had not. The difference between us was not like comparing one cultivator to another. It was like comparing a pond to weather. My living domain instinctively contracted. Iria tilted her head. You opened a nursery gate. I swallowed. What nursery? She looked past me through the portal toward the 7 valleys. That one, the biggest fish in my world, had just been informed that my world was a greenhouse. Iria explained carefully. The 7 valleys were one of thousands of isolated preservation zones established by an ancient civilization associated with the Great Canopy. Their purpose had been to protect plant lineages, beast species, soil cultures, and low-level cultivation ecosystems during a catastrophe so old even Iria knew it mostly through archives. Our legendary founders. Garden staff. Our ancient supreme cultivation. Foundational. Our most powerful artifacts. Maintenance tools. I should have felt humiliated. Instead, I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because after years of discovering that every supposedly separate cultivation path depended on living systems, finding out my entire civilization had misunderstood a garden seemed painfully appropriate. Then Iria examined my cultivation. Her expression changed. She touched one bridgegrass root. Then another. She walked through the portal and spent nearly an hour silently studying Mountain Root Farm. Finally, she asked, "Who taught you integrated 100-branch cultivation?" No one. Her eyes narrowed. That answer is impossible. I hear that often. She pointed toward the silver reeds. Talisman fiber. Yes. Then toward medicinal terraces. Alchemy conditioning. Yes. Then toward Taru's grazing fields. Beast development crops. Yes. Then toward my living arrays. Formation agriculture. Yes. And these connecting grasses. I bred them. Iria went very still. In the Great Canopy, she explained, spirit farmers specialized. Alchemy growers. Beast habitat cultivators. Formation gardeners. Fiber masters. Medicinal orchard keepers. Few attempted more than one discipline because higher cultivation paths became increasingly complex. What I had done was crude by Great Canopy standards, but broad, integrated, and somehow self-reinforcing. She called it 100-branch cultivation. An old method. Rare. nearly abandoned. My earth knowledge had accidentally pushed me toward the same principle. A farm was not separate crops. An ecosystem was not separate species. Specialization had made their cultivation powerful. Integration had made mine compound. For 3 days, I thought the discovery of the wider world was the greatest thing that could possibly happen. Then Hollowvine crossed the gate, and I learned why nurseries had locks. Hollowvine looked harmless. That was its first advantage. A thin green creeper peered beside the worldroot gate. I assumed it belonged to the great canopy. Iria assumed it came from our side. By the time either of us questioned it, the vine had already rooted. 12 hours later, it covered 30 square meters. Taru cut it. Every cut section rooted. Myra burned one patch with a talisman. The heat triggered seed pods we had not noticed. They burst. That was a bad afternoon. Within 3 days, Hollowvine reached an irrigation channel. Within 5, I sensed it moving underground. Iria's expression became increasingly severe. Hollowvine is a realm parasite. What does that mean? It follows established spiritual networks, consumes cultivated energy, and converts stable systems into reproductive mass. I looked toward my 70 interconnected terraces. So I built it a road. Several roads. Wonderful. Local cultivators wanted to destroy it with force. I refused. They complained. Iria supported me. That surprised them more. A canopy cultivator could have erased an ordinary valley with raw power. But Hollowvine had already entered the ancient worldroot channels beneath the 7 valleys. Destroying those channels could collapse the gate. Worse, the parasite had begun wrapping around old ecological nodes. Burning, it would damage everything connected to it. For the first time since becoming locally overwhelming, power did not solve my problem. I loved that less than I expected. I became controlling. That was Myra's word. Again, I stopped delegating. I personally inspected every infected field. I rejected suggestions too quickly. I slept 3 hours in 4 days. I shouted at Taru for moving Emberhorn deer without consulting me. He shouted back that the deer were his responsibility. I told Myra her containment talismans were disrupting root fungi. She told me my root fungi did not have opinions about my personality, but she did. Iria watched all of this. Then one evening, she asked me why I thought ecosystems were resilient. Diversity. And redundancy. And distributed functions. And I realized where she was going. No. Interesting. I know what you're doing. Do you? She walked away. Myra finished the lesson the next morning. We were standing beside an infected terrace where Hollowvine had wrapped itself around a medicinal tree. She said, "You have spent years teaching people that no healthy system depends on one thing." I was tired enough to be irritated. Correct. Then why does this entire response depend on you? That hurt. Because she was right. My biggest weakness had never been cultivation. It was trust. On Earth, farming had taught me that preparation mattered. In the 7 valleys, Varen had taught me that dependence could be weaponized. Somewhere along the way, I had turned self-reliance into a religion. I wanted systems that could survive without suppliers. Fields that could survive drought. Seed lines that could survive disease. A life nobody could control. But independence was not the same as isolation. The farm itself should have taught me that. Nothing I grew succeeded alone. So I stopped trying to save the 7 valleys alone. We formed teams. Farmers mapped Hollowvine's spread. Formation masters identified ancient energy channels. Myra's talisman makers designed biodegradable paper seals that could remain in soil without poisoning roots. Taru's beast handlers tracked which animals avoided infected zones, and which fed on early-stage growth. Alchemists analyzed sap chemistry. Healers monitored exposure. Ordinary villagers collected seeds. Children became unexpectedly useful because they could spot the bright seed pods faster than adults. Even Varen came. That surprised me. He had lost influence after Ghost Blight, but he still controlled extensive land and employed hundreds of experienced workers. He approached me without his old confidence. "You need access to the southern terraces." "Yes. They are mine." "I know." He hesitated. "I will open them. No conditions. No ownership demand." I looked at him. He looked older. Failure had not made him wise automatically, but it had made certainty more expensive. "Thank you." He nodded once. That was all. The plan emerged from dozens of observations. Hollowvine preferred concentrated chi. It aggressively colonized high-output spirit crops. It ignored certain low-energy species. It grew toward worldroot channels. It reproduced under heat stress. It struggled in soils dominated by one specific beneficial fungus. And it loved a wild vine melon from the mist garden. That last part became our weapon. I crossed the melon with a sterile cultivated line. The first generation failed. The second grew well, but did not attract Hollowvine. The third attracted it too strongly and was immediately consumed. The fourth worked. We called it Luravine. It produced the energy signature Hollowvine preferred, but could not reproduce without controlled pollination. Alchemists altered its sap to slow Hollowvine metabolism. Myra created thin talisman strips that directed its chi release. Taru developed feed that encouraged grazing beasts to carry beneficial fungal spores along selected routes. Bridgegrass linked the entire network. For 12 days, thousands of people planted. The 7 valleys became a single coordinated agricultural operation. I felt every new connection. Not personally. That was the important difference. I did not control each node. I set principles. Others adapted them. Fields I had never visited joined the network. Farmers improved my planting patterns. Formation masters found more efficient channel geometry. Talisman makers reduced material waste. Taru discovered that moss bears spread the beneficial fungus better than any domesticated beast, mostly because nobody could convince them to walk in straight lines. Pulla found the last ancient nodes. He did this by repeatedly disappearing. We followed. Every time, he was sitting on another buried worldroot stone. Iria eventually stared at him. "Do you know what that animal is?" "A thief." Pulla bit her staff. She did not ask again. When the valley-wide formation was ready, Hollowvine covered nearly 11% of active spiritual land. Local experts predicted catastrophic loss. Instead, we starved it. Luravine drew its growth away from ancient roots. Talisman strips redirected concentrated chi. Bridgegrass shifted energy around infected channels. Fungal networks weakened the parasite underground. Beast movement spread those fungi across boundaries humans could not reach. Mixed cropping denied Hollowvine uninterrupted host fields. For 3 days, it fought the system. Then growth slowed. Then stopped. Then began retreating. Not because I destroyed it. Because the ecosystem no longer rewarded it. The surviving Hollowvine was isolated inside a stone garden under Iria's supervision. Taru thought keeping it was insane. I said invasive organisms could still teach us things. Myra said that statement explained too much about my personality. Then the 7 Valleys formation completed its first full cycle. I felt the world. Not metaphorically. Mountains. Rivers. Forests. Fields. Roots. Fungi. Beasts. People moving across soil. millions upon millions of living nodes. The energy passed through all of them, then through me. My cultivation broke. The local valley, Lord Realm, did not merely advance. It became irrelevant. Something vast opened inside my perception. I could feel where the valley ended. I could feel the worldroot gate. I could feel the great canopy beyond it, like an ocean pressing against a door. Iria stepped backward. For the first time since I met her, she looked genuinely shocked. You formed a domain. I could barely speak. Is that unusual? At your stage? She laughed once. Naledi, most cultivators spend decades learning how to build a domain after reaching this level. I looked across the valley. I think I built mine before I reached it. That was the moment I understood why my growth had become so absurd. Other cultivators stored power inside themselves. I had been expanding the thing I considered myself. After the Hollowvine crisis, the 7 valleys changed faster than they had during my entire time there. Some changes were obvious. Red Clay Estate lost its agricultural monopoly. Varen began converting sections of his land to mixed cultivation. He hated cover crops for at least another year. I considered that progress. Small farmers formed seed cooperatives. Myra's low-cost spiritual paper spread across 4 valleys. Apprentice talisman makers, who had once practiced only a few times per month, could now afford daily work. Taru became annoyingly famous after proving that specialized nutrition could influence spirit beast development. He gave a public lecture titled Feed Before Bloodline, then spent the following week complaining that every beast clan wanted his formulas for free. I reminded him that knowledge sharing was good. He accused me of hypocrisy. Fair. The deeper changes were harder to explain. Spirit farming stopped being considered a support path. Not immediately. Pride dies slower than crops. But young cultivators began visiting Mountain Root Farm specifically to learn living formations. Alchemy houses started funding agricultural research. Formation masters studied root networks. Beast tamers planted habitat corridors. Talisman makers experimented with fibers I had not developed. That last part pleased me most. People stopped copying me and started extending the idea. The system was becoming independent. Iria remained in the 7 valleys for 6 months. She taught me just enough about the great canopy to ruin my ability to feel impressive. Our valley lord realm, once considered nearly mythical, was barely enough to survive exposure to some higher world environments. Our strongest local travel formations were slower than ordinary canopy transit routes. A tree resin I had considered priceless was sold there in cooking markets. That one hurt. But the opposite happened too. Iria tested bridgegrass, then tested it again, then sent samples somewhere beyond the gate. 3 weeks later, 2 researchers arrived from the Great Canopy. Both were stronger than every valley lord I had ever known. They spent 4 days kneeling in my fields. One asked for permission before touching Pulla. I respected him immediately. They confirmed that bridgegrass carried a rare integration trait associated with ancient 100-branch cultivation. Modern specialists could connect different agricultural formations artificially. Bridgegrass allowed living networks to adapt those connections themselves. That mattered even in the wider world. So did my plant breeding. So did my ecosystem approach. For the first time, I understood the difference between being weak and being inexperienced. In the 7 valleys, I had become overwhelmingly strong. In the Great Canopy, my raw cultivation was foundational. But my method was unusual. I was not the strongest person in the ocean. I had simply entered carrying a boat nobody else had built. The question became whether I would leave. That was harder than I expected. I had wanted freedom from the moment I arrived. At first, freedom meant paying Varen, then owning my own land. then becoming strong enough that no local cultivator could threaten me. I had achieved all of it. I could stay. Nobody in the 7 valleys could force me to do anything. The farm was prosperous. People trusted me. I had friends. I had a home. The great canopy offered uncertainty. Cultivators far beyond me. Cultures I did not understand. Plants capable of killing me by releasing pollen. Yes, that was apparently a thing. Iria described a forest where the trees migrated seasonally between dimensions. I wanted to see it immediately. Myra noticed. "You are going." "I haven't decided." "You made the same face when you found the wild millet in the mist garden." "What face?" "The dangerous one." "I do not have a dangerous face." "You have a face that says you have found something nobody has crossbred yet." Taru joined us. "I assume I am not going." "You run the beast program here." "Good." He sounded relieved, then offended by his own relief. Myra was different. Her talisman work had become deeply connected to living materials. The great canopy had fiber species she had only read about. She wanted to go. She was also afraid. So was I. That mattered. Power had not removed fear. It had simply changed the kind of choices I was allowed to make while afraid. Before leaving, I visited Varen. He was walking through a clover-covered terrace. That almost made me laugh. He noticed. "Say nothing." I said nothing. "You were about to." I was. He looked across the field. I was wrong about some things. Some. He gave me a tired look. Then he asked if he could send 2 apprentices to study at Mountain Root Farm. Not managers. Apprentices. Young workers. I agreed. He hesitated. "Would you ever work with red clay again?" There was a time when hearing that question would have felt like victory. Now it felt small. Not meaningless. Just completed. "I'll work with your farmers." His mouth tightened slightly. "Not with me. If you come as a farmer." That was the last consequence I needed. Not his ruin. Not humiliation. A choice. He could remain the man who believed land and people existed beneath him. Or he could kneel in the dirt with everyone else. What happened next belonged to him. My own choice was waiting beyond the gate. The great canopy was not a place. That took me longer to understand than I would like to admit. It was a network. Worlds connected through living gates. Some were small cultivation realms. Some were vast continents suspended inside dimensional currents. Some were forests growing across moons. One was an ocean world where floating plant colonies formed cities. Iria took Myra and me through 5 gates during our first week. I stopped trying to pretend I was not overwhelmed. At the second world, a tree moved aside because it sensed Iria approaching. At the third, farmers rode enormous beetles between terraces. At the fourth, cultivation fields curved upward into the sky because gravity changed with altitude. At the fifth, I saw a medicinal orchard growing on the shell of a sleeping spirit, beast larger than a mountain range. I asked whether waking it was a concern. Iria said, "Not for another 400 years." Myra whispered, "I miss normal problems." Pulla had come too. Obviously. He walked into every world as if he owned all of them. Then we reached the Verdant Exchange, a trading world where growers from dozens of realms sold seeds, fibers, beast fodder, medicinal plants, fungi, resins, and living formation organisms. I forgot how to behave. There were seed archives containing species from environments I could not imagine. Plants that grew in darkness. Plants that fed on lightning. Plants whose roots existed in one realm while their flowers bloomed in another. Spirit moss that absorbed sound. Trees cultivated specifically to form building foundations. flowers that opened only in the presence of certain emotions. Myra dragged me away from a stall after I spent 40 minutes arguing with a merchant about pollination. "You are embarrassing us." He said those two species cannot cross. Maybe they cannot. That is not a scientific attitude. This is not science. It absolutely is. Iria watched us with the patient expression of someone reconsidering every life choice that had brought her there. My first real test in the Great Canopy came sooner than expected. Not a duel. Not an arrogant genius. A field failure. One of the exchange's research gardens had been trying for 37 years to stabilize two valuable species. One was called steroot, a medicinal plant that stored high-grade celestial chi. The other was imbervane, a formation crop capable of converting destructive fire energy into usable growth power. If combined, researchers believed the hybrid could survive on worlds with unstable solar conditions. Every attempt failed. The plants rejected each other's root chemistry. Their spiritual patterns conflicted. The project was considered nearly impossible. I learned about it because Pulla escaped into the restricted greenhouse and began eating fertilizer. The researchers were furious. I apologized. Then I noticed something. Steroot and imbervane were not incompatible in the way they thought. Their direct energy exchange was incompatible. That was different. Back home, some crops could not be planted together directly, but thrived when separated by a buffer species. I asked whether anyone had tried an intermediary root network. They had. Artificial ones. Formation channels. Spirit fungal bridges. Nothing worked. What about living plant mediation? One researcher dismissed the idea. Iria did not. We received permission for a small trial. I used bridgegrass. Not the original line. A modified strain I had developed for mixed elemental fields. For 10 days, nothing happened. On day 11, the steroot sent a fine root toward bridgegrass. On day 12, imbervane did the same. They never touched each other. They did not need to. Bridgegrass buffered the exchange. Celestial chi entered. Fire chi entered. The intermediary redistributed both. The plant stabilized. The greenhouse's monitoring formation immediately exceeded its expected range. Researchers came running. One of them checked the readings 3 times. Another sat on the ground. Iria looked at me. Foundational cultivator. I tried not to smile. The Great Canopy had shown me powers beyond anything I had imagined. And within 2 weeks of arriving, I had solved a problem people far stronger than me had failed to solve for 37 years. That was when the wider world stopped feeling like a place where I was small. It became a place where I was new. There is a difference. I remained physically weaker than countless cultivators around me. I could not cross worlds without gates. I could not grow forests with a gesture. I could not survive certain higher realm storms unaided. But raw cultivation was only one measurement. My domain continued growing. Mountain Root Farm remained connected through the WorldRoot network. Every new compatible cultivation system I created extended my understanding. Each successful ecological integration strengthened my domain. Not linearly. Exponentially. The first garden had been difficult. The next connected faster. The next faster still. I began to understand something dangerous. There might not be a practical upper limit based on my body. My body was no longer the container. It was the anchor. The container was everything I could successfully connect. One farm. One valley. One world. Then perhaps more. The thought should have frightened me. It did. It also made me want to plant something. That was probably worse. I returned to the 7 valleys before beginning formal study in the Great Canopy. Not because I was uncertain anymore. because leaving properly mattered. Mountain Root Farm had survived without me for 7 months. That felt more important than any cultivation breakthrough. Farmers had modified the living formations. Myra's workshop had expanded. Taru had developed 3 new fodder lines and named one after himself. I refused to use that name. Pulla had apparently fathered several young stonebacks despite our complete lack of awareness that he had been doing anything except stealing seedlings. That explained some things. The valley itself felt different, more alive. Not because I controlled it, because thousands of people were participating. I sat beneath the same tree where I had once formed my first large living formation. I remembered the ruined northern terrace, the gray soil, the broken irrigation, Varen's contract, the terror of realizing I was trapped in a world where one man could split stone, and I could barely make a light spell without burning myself. Now, if Varen struck me with everything he had, my domain would probably interpret it as a minor disturbance in ambient chi. That should have felt like revenge. Instead, it felt like distance. The person who frightened me no longer existed in the same scale of my life. Not because he became smaller, because I had grown. Iria once told me that this was the danger of overwhelming cultivation. People often believed becoming powerful meant settling old arguments forever. Usually, it meant discovering how few arguments deserved to follow you upward. I still cared about what Varen had done. I cared enough to ensure bonded labor contracts like mine were outlawed in 2 valleys after the agricultural reforms. I cared enough to keep seed ownership independent. I cared enough to build systems ordinary farmers could access. But I no longer needed him to suffer for me to feel free. That was useful because the Great Canopy had given me a new problem. The stabilized steroot and Imbervine experiment had attracted attention. A lot of attention. 100-branch cultivation was rare. Integrated living domains were rarer. A foundational cultivator, independently building one across an isolated nursery world, was apparently the kind of event higher realm scholars enjoyed arguing about. I received invitations. Research guilds. Botanical orders. Formation institutes. Beast ecology houses. One organization offered enough resources to purchase several 7 valleys equivalents. Iria advised caution. Myra advised reading every document twice. Taru advised charging more. All useful. But the invitation that interested me came from the Seed Horizon expedition. They explored forgotten cultivation worlds. Not ruins for weapons. Not secret realms for treasure. Ecological worlds. Places where old spirit plant lineages survived. Places containing unknown species. Abandoned world gardens. Failed terraforming realms. Beast ecosystems that had developed without human cultivation. They wanted someone capable of integrating unfamiliar living systems. I wanted to go before I finished reading the letter. Myra saw my face. No. I haven't said anything. You are making the face. There is no face. There is absolutely a face. I accepted. Before departure, Iria took me to a quiet platform beyond the Worldroot Gate. From there, I could see dozens of living paths stretching through darkness. Not roads. Connections between worlds. Some bright. Some faint. Some dormant. She pointed toward one distant green thread. That leads to a cultivation world larger than the 7 valleys. I nodded. Then another. That one leads to a forest civilization with 11 inhabited moons. Another. That route continues beyond mapped canopy territory. The scale finally settled into me. The 7 valleys had once seemed like an entire world. Then they became a nursery. The Great Canopy had seemed like the ocean. Now I could already see currents leading beyond it. I thought about Lesotho. Mountain fields, thin soil, cold mornings, stone walls, water deciding where it wanted to go. I had learned there that farming was never about commanding land. You negotiated. You observed. You adapted. You built conditions where life could do more than you could force it to do. Cultivation, it turned out, was the same. I had started by wanting strength, then independence, then understanding. What I found was connection. The more life I cultivated successfully, the larger my domain became. The larger my domain became, the less meaningful old limits were. And every time I crossed one limit, I found another landscape beyond it. The Seed Horizon expedition departed at dawn. Myra came with me. She had accepted a research position, studying living talisman materials. Taru stayed behind, claiming somebody responsible needed to stop our farm from becoming a sanctuary for every hungry spirit beast in the valley. Pulla came with us. Nobody invited him. Our first destination was a secret realm called the Broken Orchard, a world abandoned for 8,000 years because its plant species had become spiritually incompatible after some ancient disaster. The expedition believed recovery would require decades. Iria handed me 2 preserved specimens before departure. One grew only under lunar chi, the other only in volcanic soil. According to every cultivation record available, their energies repelled each other completely. I held one in each hand. My root sense reached through them. Very faintly, beneath the obvious conflict, I felt a rhythm. Not harmony. Potential. The same kind of unfinished relationship I had once felt before creating bridgegrass. Myra noticed my expression. No. I smiled. I didn't say anything. You are making the face. The gate opened. Beyond it stretched an unknown world filled with black trees, silver rivers, and enough unfamiliar plant life to keep me busy for several lifetimes. Back in Lesotho, I learned that mountains do not stop things from growing. They decide what kind of roots survive. For years, I thought I was cultivating fields. Then I thought I was cultivating a valley. Then a domain. It took standing at the edge of an ocean made of worlds to understand the truth. Everything I had grown had been teaching me the same lesson. Roots are only limits when they have nowhere new to reach.